We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, we groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. This is a word from God.
Thanks be to God.
On Sunday mornings, I regularly sit in stairwells, church stairwells. I arrive for a worship service someplace in this town, just in time to hear the special music and a sermon. It becomes like air and water, because I need the stories of hope to counter those death-dealing stories that bombard us every day. So I kind of see that sitting in the stairwells as immunotherapy for my body and soul. But it's not the only way that I get inoculated. Of course, the earth tells its own story. As the winter deadness comes alive with spring aliveness. Yesterday, I saw a ruby-throated hummingbird. Now, that can just set your heart alive again. To see that. And I also saw the ash tree that was dying, that was in the same picture of seeing that hummingbird and seeing the ash tree dying of disease behind it. Death and life. Life and death. It's the ancient story. And the world, as a poet said, is charged with the grandeur of God. The stories were alive in our community this week. The horrifying story of gun violence and domestic violence that claimed the lives of Erica Smith and her 2 children. But it also had the story that came alive of a community that circled around with care, drawn around the family, drawn around the students in the schools that knew the teenagers. Some of you were part of that. And of course, the ongoing story, horror story, that was so vivid in Asheville this past week with the ICE raids that have seized people in our immigrant community. That the story went forth of the community coming together to take food to those too frightened to even go to the grocery store. It was the unfolding story of accompaniment and kinship and our connectedness to one another that countered the cruel stories of detainment and deportation. The story of hope is being embodied. And that's the best way to know the story, isn't it? But there's also a part of me that longs to hear the ancient story. That old story that has been told around the world through centuries that still speaks to us today of courage and compassion and God's surprise. So I sit in stairwells. So you might say that I'm a Sunday stairwell story stalker.
Well,
Last Sunday, I arrived late, as was my custom, and the doors of the church house that I chose were locked. Security measures, but I hadn't counted on that. And it was pouring down rain, do you recall, last Sunday morning? The winds were rather big as well. And so my mad dash to the front door turned into a desperate search for an unlocked door. Front door, side door, back door, all locked. But I was persistent. I rattled the front door again until it was finally open. And there was the story. shelter from the storm.
Well,
Sanctuary. And it was a story in which I could not have pulled it off by myself. I received sanctuary by the help of others. So I sat in my puddle, this time in a pew, because of the escort I got into the sanctuary. And I thank God that once again, the story, God's surprise story, came alive. So in that sheltering of the storm, I thought of a story for today, of a man who needed shelter from the storms of his life. His name was Naaman, and if you know that story, he was a general in the army of Syria. And he had won so many battles, and he was victorious and lauded for all of his great strength and courage. He lived the prevailing story of domination, of might makes right, of violence stops violence, and fear breeds control. And under his authority of national security, he commanded forces of war without any conscience to the consequences of the pain and suffering caused by people and places. But he was still lauded and praised, making the nation strong. But the great general began to suffer from leprosy. It was devastating to him. He couldn't control it. The disease further isolated him from the people. No one wanted to be around him for fear that they would contract the disease. And the worst part of leprosy, lepers feel no pain. It is ironic that Naaman's privilege had kept him from feeling the pain of others, and his disease kept him from feeling his own pain, and both were destroying him. It might sound like an absolutely wonderful thing to feel no pain, but it is disastrous. For a leper, a touch to a stove doesn't register hot, and they can burn their hands beyond repair. They can break a leg and not know it and be crippled for life. Without the sensation of touch or pain, infections can go untreated, wounds unattended, and cuts unnoticed. Pain is the gift that nobody wants. Naaman had no story for this part of his life. He had no story for this powerless time that he found himself in. His money could not save him. His position could not save him. His privilege could not save him. And if you're thinking right now, thank God I'm not like Naaman, let's pause for just a moment.
well,
How many times do we think we can manage things alone? Or how many times do we say we can solve this, get better organized, get better leaders? How many times do we shelve the pain? And do our addictions indicate our lack of ability to know what to do with pain? There was a tiny voice with another story that emerged in this story. She was a little servant girl. We don't know her name. And she served Naaman's wife. She had been taken captive from the land of Israel and forced into slavery. But she had some spunk. She had courage and compassion to speak and to tell a different story. She sent word to Naaman, through his wife, that his cure was waiting for him if he'd cross the border and see the prophet Elisha. Without any more options, and desperate, Naaman took vast amounts of gold and silver, still living into his story, that he could buy his healing. But he got to the land of Israel. He knocked on the door of the prophet, and the prophet wouldn't even come to the door. Because the prophet wouldn't take the money and the gifts, refused even to see him. Instead, he sent word through a messenger for Naaman to wash himself 7 times in the River Jordan. Now, Naaman hadn't come all that way to be dismissed. He had a letter from the king, after all. Elisha infuriated Naaman by ignoring him, by not playing his power games, by treating him like an ordinary person. And besides, Naaman, the prophet, didn't even guarantee any success that he could be healed. So Naaman started heading back to his own land, vowing never to go into that dirty old Jordan River. But one of his servants, ones he usually ignored, said to him, "Oh, sir, what do you have to lose? Why not go to the waters like everybody else?" Desperation can do unusual things in us. Naaman could not seize healing by force, by sending in troops, by title, by past victories, by armed escorts, by raids, by arrests, or by threats. He was far more ordinary than he imagined. And the healing power of the water was there for everyone. Naaman went to those waters like everybody. The story says he was healed. For a leper, healing begins with feeling pain. And could it be that healing begins with our acknowledging pain? Not going numb to it or ignoring it, but recognizing it as a messenger. The earth's pains, what message does it give to us? God's pain, what is the message? If we're numb to pain, do we neglect the cure? Richard Rohr says, pain that is not transformed is transmitted. Maybe for Naaman, the beginning of his joining the human family and being connected to all of us who suffered was his healing in those waters. Maybe it began in his vulnerability, when he was powerless, when he had to surrender to things he could not manage. Does it increase our capacity for empathy when we know our own pain? Can we connect with the pain of others? The waters of the earth healed him. He immersed himself in the waters that were available to everyone. The essential waters of our common home. Look at all the waters. Naaman went back to the prophet Elisha. And once again, he was still, that old story was still kind of in him. And he tried once again to give gold and silver. And once again, Elisha the prophet said, "No, that's not the story we're living into. That old story doesn't work." A new story emerged. Since Elisha wouldn't take it, Naaman asked if he could take 2 mule loads of earth from the river bank back home. He wanted to take it home, a visible reminder of his place of healing, an altar in the world, a reminder of his ground of being, the dirt from which all of us are made, connected Maybe then, with that dirt, Naaman could be reminded that his conquering gods would never save him. The surprise story of God comes again and again and again to us. It was dirt and water, and the voices of the most vulnerable ones who offered Naaman a different story, one that led to healing and transformation. Oh, the world is charged with the grandeur of God.
Good.